thank you everyone for coming today. And as part of the digital apprenticeships series that we've been put together, we thought we'd do something that was an interesting topic rather than something which is purely about apprenticeships. So we thought we'd have a look at generative AI and data protection, because we know it's something that everyone's now having to think about. We know that it is something that's part of everyday business now. And so the question we're kind of looking at today is that use visible, governed and safe, and how that relates to the protection duties in the UK. So I am Alton Thompson, Senior Lecturer at the Open University. My colleague Martin Rothwell is also a Senior Lecturer. We've both been very involved with the development of our apprenticeships. But we are also, of course, expert academics in our own fields. And one of the things that I do is teach our final year data management and analysis course. And of course, one of the things we look at is data protection within that. I'm not going to claim that I'm a legal expert in any sense. It's far more a kind of a practical understanding of the things that we look at. All right. So I've already mentioned I'm doing a recording today. So a typical scenario would be that a staff member pastes a customer complaint to HR note or spreadsheet into a free AI tool to save time. It feels harmless, but the organisation may have just disclosed personal confidential data to a third party without checking lawful basis, contract terms, retention rules and security controls. And it's, you know, why does this happen in business? Why do we have these kind of challenges? And I think we're all in the situation now, or at least many of us, especially if we come from a computing background, we like mucking around. We'll load up an AI and we'll say, "Oh, this is a nice shiny tool. What can I do with it?" And it can be very tempting just to give it a go. And equally in an organization, if someone is stressed, doesn't really have time, they might think, "Oh, I've heard about this AI. I'm just going to try it and see if it solves my problem for me." And I think large companies, to an extent, at least have clear rules on that. Whether every employee follows those rules is an interesting question. But they have a rule, and that's going to give them quite a bit of legal protection, because they say, "We've trained our staff, we've done this and this, that and the other." But if you haven't got those, you might be at significant risk, especially if something goes wrong. So what's changing? How is AI changing our work? So I think we all recognise some of the things on the left here. So drafting content, summarising documents, generating code, assisting HR recruitment. It's increasingly a common thing that if you're doing recruitment, you get far too many applicants, you start to try and use AI to try and just do the first sift. I'll talk a little bit in a bit about why that might be particularly dangerous from a legal perspective. But here we can also say it might reuse input data in unexpected ways. So many of the AI tools, particularly the free ones, have clauses in their licensing which says that they can take your chat and everything you've uploaded it and use it in training their AI model in some way. They often claim that they impersonalize it first, but how much do we trust that when it's an automated system? They can produce inaccurate or fabricated output. It's a bit of a stretch to say that they know they're doing this, because it is at the end of the day an algorithm. But we need to check what comes out. They might reveal confidential information that is put into them to someone else, especially if you are using a tool that you know very little about. How secure is it? Is that screen being seen by someone else by default? Is there a hacker running the system in the background, just pulling data that's put into it? Hopefully, if you're using a big system like Microsoft, they are well secured to prevent that, but this could still happen even to them. It can introduce bias and unfairness. So AIs are well known for having an awful lot of bias in them, in the sense that they've been trained on data that's mostly come from the web. So it has a lot of white Western male bias built into it, because that's what's on the web. And so it doesn't reduce bias in the way that we might think a computer system should. And it can create unclear accountability. We don't know what AI has done, how it's done it. It doesn't have reasons in the way a human might have. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Information Commissioner's Office's guidance about AI, and what that means, how we start to, what we have to recognise in these points. And I strongly recommend, if you've not read the guidance, do go and read it. It is very clear, and it's now also been established for some time. So the document I'm referring to here was first published 3 years ago. So there's no excuse for not looking at this. And if a legal situation did occur, you wouldn't have the argument to say, oh, AI is a new thing. You know, there's been published government guidance now for multiple years. And the quote here says, while AI increases the importance of embedding data protection by design and default into an organization's culture and processes, the technical complexities can make this more difficult. And so there's a need to demonstrate how you've addressed these complexities within your accountability. And I'm afraid it's one of those red tape things. You need to have written down somewhere what you have done and what you've thought about, because if something goes wrong, that's part of your legal defense. But also, of course, if you've thought about it, it's far less likely to go wrong. And that's an important factor here. And don't rely on AI doing this for you either. I think it is somewhere where you need that kind of critical human intervention. So I've tried to kind of summarize some key questions here. I'm not going to read through the questions, but just to talk you through the ideas here. As I said, using an AI tool doesn't outsource responsibility in any way. An organization has to decide why and how personal data is processed. It's still a controller, even if you're using a vendor-supplied tool. And UK GDPR and the Data Protection Act 2018 still gives the core framework. There is further information in the Data Use and Access Act, which doesn't replace them, but makes changes to particular areas around automated decision making. And as I mentioned, that's a particular concern with AI if you are embedding it in a way to remove humans from the loop, as people are starting to do in certain areas. And other things about subject access complaints and legitimate interests. So just thinking about AI briefly there with the other things. So subject access. So if you've put some personal information about a customer or an employee into an AI tool, and that AI is now being trained using their personal information, you can't provide subject access anymore. You can't say how that data is being used. In terms of complaints and legitimate interest, again, you don't necessarily know what's happened. And guidance is continually being updated. So if you go to the ICO at the moment, they'll say Data Use and Access Act. Although it's come into law, they haven't updated the guidance yet, which is quite embarrassing, really. I think the last time I had a good look at the website, they were starting to publish new guidance at the beginning of this year. So, but it hasn't touched the stuff about AI yet. So the first thing that I'd mentioned or highlighted on this slide is you will need some kind of data protection impact assessment if you are using tools where personal data gets attached in some way. So if you've got anything effectively that identifies a living individual in the data you're uploading, you need to be careful. Now, there's other things that you might want to be careful about ethics and about revealing confidential business information, but that doesn't directly feed into data protection. But if you've got living individuals, it can be a problem. So at the very least, it's making sure everyone understands that if you're getting an AI tool to write your emails for you or something like that, you need to make sure you're only pasting first names or something like that. So there's a certain amount of anonymity there. But even then, if you're a small business and you only deal with, I don't know, 30 customers or something, a first name is enough to identify someone. So you'd need to not even put that in. So there's some specific information at the ICO to do with explaining decisions. And I think this is well worth looking at. And this was introduced 4 years ago. So we can see we've got a lot of history already in how to deal with this. And it's about making sure that people trust your organization as much as anything else, as well as the legal requirements. Because if you are using AI, for example, to sift applications, or you're using AI as a first line of support to individuals when they're coming for customer support, then they want to know that they're getting a proper service. So it's not just the idea that they're like a human answering the question, because we all know that if you employ some low-skilled people to man the phones, they're not necessarily going to be any better than AI in answering questions as they come in. But a lot of people will feel icky about it if they don't really know what's being covered. So an important element, if you were to go through this, is sort of think about how do we make it transparent? How do we explain to people how AI is being used, and give them the opportunity to let us know if there's a problem? So if your AI is doing customer support and it is being biased to a particular group of people, you want to know about it, because those people are going to go and work with another business. In effect, they're going to get annoyed and leave. Some common pitfalls here. Again, I'm not going to read through it. I'll talk about it instead. That can happen particularly in smaller and medium-sized enterprises. Because small businesses are generally more agile, generally people get on with doing the work. There tends to be less bureaucracy, so things aren't checked routinely. But that doesn't mean that you don't have an obligation to think about how to use it. Particular things that I would call out is people using personal AI accounts, just as bad as someone using personal email accounts for business purposes, in terms of the risk of data which should remain in your organization getting out of your organization. And I would suggest keeping things pretty simple. You don't need to have a lot of rules and some kind of traffic light approach of sort of saying, yes, these are things you can use, and no, these are other things that you should not use, or we should discuss more before you're using them, might be enough for many places. And in other cases, it might simply be about, well, we're going to subscribe to Microsoft Office, and that is going to deliver us the Copilot AI. We can configure that in such a way that it keeps our data safe if we use an appropriate business license. And that might get us most of the way there without having to do anything extra. We can then record it and so on. So if something did go wrong, we can say, yeah, we looked at it and this is what we've done. It's not going to stop liability, but hopefully it will limit it to a certain extent. So in terms of what we're doing with apprenticeships, we want to make sure our apprentices are ready for AI-enabled workplaces. And we know that in computing and digital space, AI is already being extensively used in various ways. It does vary between organizations, but it is being used. We want to make sure we're supporting apprentices to use AI responsibly, ethically, and in line with legal and organizational expectations. So understanding what is this AI thing, what are the risks of using it, and so on. So if you are a smaller employer taking an apprentice and you've not tackled this yet, even if they're doing networking or software development or whatever with us, we're baking that in as something that needs to be covered. It's not an explicit part of the apprenticeship requirements, but if we go and look at the knowledge, skills, and behaviours, we'll see that ethics are talked about, and AI clearly fits into that now. Also talks about tools and how to use those tools. We allow students to use AI in their assessment on the apprenticeships with clear declaration, transparency, and learner ownership. So this is about taking responsibility for using the AI. It doesn't make a decision for you. You need to make that decision yourself, having seen the output. Certainly, it's a mistake that I make when I'm busy. I think, oh, this AI stuff looks good. I scan through it, get it out the door, but it might not actually get us all of the way there. We want to promote why you still want to do things the hard way through personal learning and professional judgment. So as humans, we need to actively engage to learn things, and we have to do it repeatedly to reinforce that learning. That's how all of our learning is designed at the OU, but also it's something we want to promote in terms of lifelong learning to apprentices. So you've got the new tool, you try it out, you get some feedback from someone, you do something. If you don't go through that process, you never learn properly. We particularly want to develop critical analysis and independent thinking. Any kind of university and degree level study, this is our key outputs. And we believe, and the research points to this, that will continue to be important in an AI-enabled world, because we have to interpret what AIs do and so on. Humans are also much better at creating new insights and novel solutions than AI. And so we embed that into our teaching and explain to our apprentices and students why they need to be involved in this loop. And we want to apply human reasoning. There's a particular word for abductive, heuristic, and intuitive that current GenAIs just can't do. It's not how they're programmed to work. And these, you might look at them particularly at sort of things like tacit understanding, experience-based judgment, small and medium-sized enterprises. This is how you move quickly and answer customer problems and so on. So that is getting me to the end of what I'm going to talk about. And I've suggested 5 steps here that you might want to screenshot and take away from you about things that you just need to get on with, as it were, in terms of your AI journey. And if you've not done this kind of stuff, I'd say take it away and do it in the next week, because I think these are so important. Map current AI use. What are your staff doing at the moment, both formally and informally? Even if you've got a policy, it's well worth going around and saying, you know, are you doing something on the side on your phone that you've not said? You know, even if it's just sort of agreeing that that's okay, at least then you know about it. Approved tools. Try not to rely on personal accounts. You might have to pay for it, but again, not too expensive through the Microsoft route if you're already paying for Office. Create a short AI use policy. As I said, keep it really simple for smaller organizations. Use a traffic light policy to sort of say what can be done and what can't. There's no need to have long rules if you're talking to each other every day, but then at least it's written down. Train staff, make sure that they understand about data confidentiality, accuracy, review of outputs, and so on, so that they know what AI is capable of. And we've got materials on Open Learn, and there'll be more that head that way, I'm sure, over the next few years, where you can learn about those for free, if that's helpful. And review high-risk uses. So if you are using it for things like HR, if you are using it to converse directly with customers in support, and you've not thought about it, make sure you have those thoughts now, and think about, you know, how do we build in the legal issues. And that kind of brings us to the end of the presentation bit. If you want to know more about apprenticeships, I'm going to suggest you visit the Digital Hub at the link on the screen. And I think for most of you, responsible AI use starts with 3 simple moves. Know what tools are being used, control what data goes into them, and require human review of what comes out. If that's all you have written down in your AI policy, you're going to get some of the way there, perhaps not all of it, but it's a good place to start. And if you do have any personal data that you find going near AI, that's something you need to really think about in terms of the lawful basis of processing, transparency, minimizing data, security, and accountability, just like you've always had to do. Good governance is not complex, but it needs to be done, needs to be documented. Thank you very much. Shall we stop the recording there, Martin, and then we can take any questions that anyone has?